Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. I hope everyone is enjoying the Wilds of Eldraine pre-release this weekend. I'm so stoked for next week, as we have a special themed episode, where we test out the new Eldraine commanders in a CEDH setting, and I even got a special guest to give us expert opinion for one of the decks. So definitely tune in next week for that episode. Also, have you heard the news? Your favorite CEDH YouTube channel has released some cool merch. And if you're interested in picking up some sweet new apparel, come check us out. Also, if you like what you see, consider joining our Patreon, as with your help, we can keep producing the videos you enjoy. And if you want to play with us, hop on our Discord. We have an ever-growing community that loves to talk MTG, or whatever else strikes our fancy. And we would love to meet new people. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. Starting us off is Blake playing Korvold, Killer of Dockside. No longer on food chain, Korvold is all about that Dockside, and not just casting him, but sacking and reanimating him, since Goblin is a dragon's favorite food. This is another fast Turbo Nos list that can end games quickly, even without the Nos, by just casting Korvold and beating face. Next up is Sam on Narset, the Enlightened Exile. This is a Jeskai mid-range strategy, whose goal is to leverage Narset's recursion to win through Underworld Breach combos or Dualcaster Mage. And with the ability to also steal cards out of your opponent's graveyard, you can often find unique synergies not generally allowed in your colors. In the third spot is Hidden, piloting Tivit, Seller of Secrets. This is an Esper deck that carries a high density of win cons, plus having a one-card combo in Time Sieve makes Tivit an ever-present threat, while functioning as a hard-to-interact with value engine in the meantime. And bringing up the rear is Josh, who's brought Dargo Thrasios. This is a mid-range teamwork combo list. It has multiple different wins, from a fast Dargo into a Tidespout, Dockside Flickers, or just playing the long game with Thrasios and Seedborn. This deck always has multiple different lines of attack, and can really overwhelm the board. But without further ado, let's get onto the gameplay. Josh actually has a pregame effect, as he puts a Gemstone Caverns into play, exiling a Mox Diamond. Blake actually starts off the game with a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it to grab an untapped Stomping Grounds. He then follows it up with a Chrome Mox, imprinting a Life Death. He's still got more, as he taps his land for a Soul Ring, and then the ring for a Crim Monolith, finally ending his turn with a Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm done.
He just turned one Docksides.
Sam, on the other hand, has a pretty quick turn, just playing a Wooded Foothills as land. Hidden plays an Underground Sea and a Lotus Petal, passing after that. Josh has a Bloodstained Mire as land and casts a Mox Opal. He then cracks his fetch for a Volk and shortcuts as he Thrasioses and Passioses. Blake starts off his turn casting his commander Korvold. The dragon resolves, and on ETB he sacrifices his Deathrite to draw a card and gain a counter on Korvold. He plays a Mana Conflux as land and takes one to cast a Timber Wall, with Sam at his end step cracking his fetch for Aragrin Triome. Sam plays a Volcanic Island and is in it for the long game, as he just passes after that. Hidden has a Vault of Champions as land.
I guess I want that Korvold. Have a drink.
Son of a bitch. Tivit and a Korvold? Oh, baby.
I mean, I'm far off.
Imagine with the clues
That would
and the
be
treasures
so
and
good.
the... Oh.
But I'm a little far off from doing that.
Josh plays a Misty Rainforest and then casts a Goblin Bombardment. He decides to crack his fetch for a land to cast a spell, and in response, Sam flashes in an Archivist of Ogma to gain him a life and draw a card. Josh ends up grabbing a Taiga and is done after that. Blake untaps and cracks his Tinderwall for double red. He uses one of it on a gamble, triggering the Archivist. Blake ends up finding a card and randomly discards a Hoarding Broodlord, with the whole table wondering if that was a good or bad thing to see in the graveyard. And, well, I guess the table was right to be afraid, as he follows it up with an Animate Dead on the dragon. Although Sam does have a response, as he Force of Wills it, exiling an offer you can't refuse. Sam takes 2 on his turn to get Probe Hidden. He looks at his hand, draws, and then plays a training center as land, following that up with a Fellwar Stone into an Esper Sentinel. Hidden on his turn shocks in a Hollowed Fountain. Then for 3 he casts a Ranger Captain of Eos, grabbing an Esper Sentinel on ETB and giving Sam another card off his Archivist. Hidden then cracks his pedal for a white, triggering Korvold for a counter and a draw, ending his turn with his Tutored Sentinel. Josh plays a Forest as land and passes. Blake has the City of Brass and heads to combat. He sends the Drake at Josh since there's a big scary dragon protecting Hidden's side of the field. Sam has a Mox Diamond and doesn't pay for the Esper Sentinel, following it up with his commander Narset. A Scalding Karn then comes out for Hidden, who cracks it to trigger Korvold and the Archivist. Hidden ends up grabbing a Tundra and follows this up with a Grim Monolith. Hidden pays for Sam's Sentinel, with Josh at his end step activating Thrasios to bottom a card and reveal a Force of Will. Josh then heads to his turn and plays a Command Tower. He then taps some mana and sacrifices his Mox Opal and Thrasios to cast his other commander Dargo. Blake starts off with combat. This time he sends his Drake at Sam, who takes the hit, with Sam at his end step swordsing the Ranger Captain. This gives a card to Hidden off the Esper Sentinel, but thinking Sam must be going for a win attempt, responds with an offer you can't refuse. Hidden doesn't pay for Sam's Sentinel, but the swords is countered for now at least. Sam heads straight to combat and sends Narset at Blake. On attack, Narset triggers and targets the Animate Dead in Blake's graveyard. Pretty sure this is a win if he doesn't stop it. Hidden sacrifices his Ranger Captain. This does net him a card off Korvold. Blake then takes the hit and Sam passes after that. Hidden plays a Windswept Heath as land and cracks it to search. He draws off Korvold and goes searching, finding a scrubland, with Sam getting a draw off the Archivist. Hidden then decides it's time to go for his commander, Tivit. He does know about the Force from Josh, but is hoping he doesn't have another blue card to pitch for it. Unfortunately, he's not correct, as Josh does cast a Force of Will, exiling a Swan Song to cast it for free. Josh then pays for Hidden's Esper Sentinel, but not Sam's, with Hidden trying to fight for his commander with the delay. He can't pay for Sam's Esper, who then responds with a Swan Song of his own. He pays for Hidden's Sentinel, and ultimately Hidden ends up with a 2/2 bird. And while Tivit would have been better, at least now Hidden has something to sack to Korvold, as he turns the dragon sideways at Sam, sacrificing the bird for another card and counter. Sam takes 10 commander, and Hidden is done after that. Josh plays a Rejuvenating Springs as land and sends Dargo at Hidden for 7, also passing after that. Blake plays an Urborg and is not finding much action, as he ends his turn smacking Hidden for another 3. Sam untaps and casts a Dockside Extortionist. The Goblin resolves and gains him 6 treasures. Still needing more mana, he then snaps the Goblin back to his hand and pays for the Esper Sentinel, and untaps 2 lands. Dockside then comes back out to gain him another 6 treasures. An Ancient Tomb then comes out, and needing even more action, Sam casts a Windfall. Blake does respond, as he Culling the Weeks his Gifted Drake for mana, although he then has to spend 3 mana to pay for the Esper Sentinel trigger, with Josh also responding with an Otawara to bounce Narset back to hand. The Windfall then resolves and everyone discards and draws 7. Sam then spends 6 treasures recasting his commander, following that up with a Draenith Magistrate. Hidden untaps and on his upkeep Enlightened Tutors. He gives a card to Sam off the Esper Sentinel and another off the Archivist. He can't cast his commander just yet, but still ends up grabbing a Time Seed to put on top and draw for turn. Then on his main phase 1 he casts a Soul Ring and an Imposter Mech. The mech resolves and enters as a copy of Dockside, netting him 10 treasures since Sam doesn't want to give up any of his own treasures. Next up is the Time Seed, which resolves with Hidden immediately sacrificing 5 artifacts to take an extra turn. This also triggers Korvold for 5 counters and cards drawn.
Aren't you at 10 commander?
He is at 10.
Oh, that's funny. Your Korvold's doing work.
I know.
Hidden has a Misty Rainforest's land and sacks the land to draw another card off Korvold. He finds an untapped Watergrave and gives a card to Sam. A Jeweled Lotus then comes out, and Hidden then heads to combat and sends his stolen dragon at Sam. Hidden sacrifices his Hollowed Fountain to the Korvold trigger, but before damage happens, Sam channels an Otawaru to bounce the dragon and keep him in the game for now. Although before the bounce happens, Hidden decides to start cracking treasures to draw, as he cracks the first one for blue mana. He then uses the blue on a mystical tutor.
This is a good game.
Speak for yourself.
I'm trying. Your commander's doing work. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, on someone else's control.
Yeah.
Hidden ends up finding a Pact of Negation to put it on top. He gives a card to Sam, with Hidden then cracking 2 more treasures on a black and a blue to draw him 2 and cast a Tainted Pact. Although Sam is quick to respawn with a Flusterstorm. Not paying for the Esper Sentinel, Hidden draws, but the stack then starts resolving, with the Tainted Pact getting countered and the dragon going back to Blake's hand. With Hidden on his second main casting a Wishclaw Talisman. Hidden then heads to his extra turn and discards a few cards due to hand size. Hidden untaps and immediately Wishclaws. He gives the Talisman to Blake and a card to Sam. Hidden then casts a Thassa's Oracle. The Merfolk resolves, but realizing he'd be dead to his own Esper Sentinel, Hidden casts a Chain of Vapor on his creature. Sam does have a response as he casts a Deflecting Swat, targeting the chain. He doesn't pay for the Sentinel, with Hidden firing back with a Swan Song. We realize at this point Sam needed to draw off his own Sentinel, and he does so. 2 life is then paid for a Mental Misstep on the Swan Song, and that causes Hidden to finally use his Pact of Negation. Although still not done yet with the chain of responses, Sam casts a Silence. Luckily the table has forgotten about the Time Seep, to which Hidden activates it by sacrificing 5 artifacts, including the Esper Sentinel. And with all that still on the stack, Hidden casts his Demonic Consultation, naming You're Already Dead.
I don't have anything.
I guess you're just dead on board.
Yes! We got there! I'm so happy.
And before I get on to the game review, I do want to thank a special Patreon member, Josh Schutt, for his support of the channel, along with our other Patreon supporters as well. Game review. Dang, Korvold is such a good commander. Well, at least if you control the dragon. That Gilded Drake was devastating to Blake, especially since his hand was basically spent to even cast the spell, and that left him pretty dead in the water. Speaking of dead in the water, Josh was not doing a whole lot. His hand was unfortunately pretty awkward, and while his force did save the table, he didn't have really much anything else to back it up after that. Although props to Sam, as he was fighting both tooth and nail to try and not only stay in the game, but win it as well. I do think the turning point was the windfall, but he was needing to refill and had to take the chance. As for myself, I think overall I played it alright. I'm certainly glad though I got the table to fight over my Chain of Vapor instead of my actual win. Although the MVP really was getting to abuse Blake's stolen Korvold, and that was really critical for me to get enough card advantage to fight through those several counter wars me and Sam had. But thanks to everyone that played, and remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.